Welcome friends, on behalf of Kingmakers IAS Academy, I'm Madhvi presenting you the 5 editorials of the week. This editorial of the week session is about helping you get the stock points from the important editorials from the Hindu newspaper and getting it to your notes as well as to your answer writing in the mains. So this will get you all the understanding that you need for the editorials, that is very important editorials. So let's get to the topics which are coming in the Hindu newspaper as well as other newspapers, and then we will move on to the stock points from each editorial. Here, the topic of discussion today is first, key to revitalizing India's reservation system. This was taken from 6th September of the Hindu. I also clubbed it with another editorial which was coming on 8th September, that is refining the reservation policy. And I also clubbed it with another editorial, also came on 8th September, but I have not mentioned here because I have taken only one gist from that. So this two important editorial I have discussed in detail with points clubbed together. And the second one is the judicial role in improving lawmaking. This was again in the 6th September from Hindu newspaper. The spirit of federalism lies in consultation. Then the fourth topic, the economic reforms looking back to look ahead. Fifth, the national security discourse is changing. So these topics are wide and having a variety of stock points that will get you in the answer writing. So let's get to the first topic, that is key to revitalizing the India's reservation system. So this topic is very important because it has its syllabus point of view, that is from general studies to welfare schemes for vulnerable sections of the population by the center and states and performance of these schemes. So this reservation system, if you consider as a scheme, you have to analyze the effectiveness of the scheme and all the aspects related to it. So these three important editorial which was coming in news in this week could get you all the important dimensions that needed for you to think about a reservation. This is first one, the key to revitalizing India's reservation system, refining the reservation policy, a questionable quota policy, or this quota is again the reservation quota. So these three editorials was very important that I found about this reservation. So there is a debate about reservation and the census, that is the caste-based census, which was coming in news. So let's get all the stock points that is needed from these editorials. The premise. Recently there was a talk about reservation, but why? Because reservation for OBC was coming in this NEET exam. NEET is the entrance exam for the medical examination for the UG as well as PG medical students. So this reservation for OBC was given in the NEET exam, as well as there was a debate on the need for caste census. There are various state chief ministers who are demanding for a caste census to be included along with the census, that is the census that we take every 10 years. So this demand was there. So this topic was telling you all the stock points that the author wants to give. Points to be noted. Policy of affirmative action. You have to understand why there was a reservation. So the reservation is because this Article 15 and 16 has told you that reservation should be given to those who are socially and educationally backward. They're called as SEBC shortly, that is socially and educationally backward classes. This Article 15 talks about reservation for women and children, and this Article 16 talks about the reservation for those who are socially and economic backward in the government jobs. So basically there are two reservations, one in the public institutions like government jobs, that is government PSUs, and then in the educational institutions or central universities. and also the reservation in the political institutions. Like we have reservations in the Panchayat Raj institutions, as well as in the, there is a demand for reservation in the parliament as well for the women. So like this, there are reservations in the public institutions and the political institutions for the socially and economically backward classes, including SC, ST. And there is also provision for the women and children. The reservation is for the women and children and the Article 50. This reservation is because there is a historical discrimination which was experienced by those people who are socially and educationally backward today. Because those historically they were discriminated, they are still socially and economically backward. So there is a need for a special attention to them. So the constitutional makers clearly identified them and said that there is a need for a policy of affirmative action. Why this affirmative action? In order to lift them up. Okay, in order to lift them up from a position which is very backward. So they are pushed backward because of the historical discrimination in the name of caste, religion, region, the gender, and so on and so forth, even as sex, because there are transgender who are pushed backward because of this gender discrimination as well. So there is a need for a policy of affirmative action, which is mentioned in Article 15 and 16. So with that, let's see what the author wants to speak. Why there is a need for the reservation system. This will set the context what the reservation has to be given, how much the reservation has to be given now, and what is the way for the reservation to be given now. So what is the need? The remedy for historic oppression and humiliation in order to lift them up, that is to create a social mobility for them. What is this mobility? I mean is giving them opportunity. That is because they are very backward, they are unable to grab the opportunity of getting a job in the public institutions or getting education from the government institutes. So there is a need for creating a social mobility among the backward classes. So there is the need to remedy those historic oppression and humiliation. So we have gone for a policy of affirmative action, which is otherwise called as positive discrimination. Positive discrimination and also reservation. So this name, that is affirmative action, positive discrimination, reservation, are one and the same. This remedy for historic oppression and humiliation is through policy of affirmative action. Then finding a place in power sharing and decision making process. So all must be given an equal opportunity is the one thing. How the equal opportunity can be provided to the backward classes? They cannot be provided equal treatment because they are little backward. So there needs to be a little reach out to them. So there will be a need for a reaching out to them because they are very backward. So the equal opportunity requires a special attention. So this special attention is what is called as policy of affirmative action, so that they have their place in the power sharing, like the political institution I talked about, and in the decision-making process, that is in the political institutions as well as in the public institutions. An act of ensuring social justice. So social justice is very much required for those people who are backward, so that everybody has the equal opportunities and they are able to play a fair game. So there is the need for providing them social justice because they have faced the historical oppression. So that the reservation is for this, to remedy the historic oppression, to provide them power sharing and decision-making process, an act of ensuring social justice. So these are the important words you have to use whenever there is a question about reservation system in your introduction or in the body of your, or even in the conclusion. Then what is the outcome? So we have talked about the need for reservation system. So the reservation is given. What is the outcome? Whether the reservation has been realized or not. Let's see this Justice G. Rohini Commission report, who has given out a survey which tells you whether this reservation has been realized or not by the backward communities. Let's see. But this G. Rohini Commission report was basically formed to subcategorize OBC, because, as you know, when the reservation is given to the OBC, there is not the benefit of the reservation does not penetrate to all the sections of the OBC who are backward. It is only a few individuals from the OBC community able to grab the opportunity given by the reservation and not the others. So the Rohini committee was to chalk out, to take out those who have become elite by experiencing the reservation benefit, and still others are backward. So those who are in a creamy layer, who has been lifted up, or who has been socially mobile now, has to be removed out so that the others are getting the benefits and not the one who are now elite. So this is what the G. Rohini Commission report's objective was. But as the G. Rohini Commission has to survey what happened to the reservation benefit, they have come to the conclusion that 97% of the central OBC quota goes to just under 25% of its caste. So this you can represent it in a pie chart, that only 25%, if I consider this as 50%, sorry, this is 25%. So 25% of the people are only benefiting out of this OBC quota, and then 97% of the central OBC quota goes to just under 25% of its caste. So 97% benefits goes to 25% of the caste. Or you can use a pyramid diagram to show that this 97% of the central quota goes to only 25%, and the bottom, that is the most backward community, are still backward. So this way you can actually represent this in a diagram also. 983 OBC communities, that is 37% of the total, have zero representation in both central government jobs and admission to central universities. So there is no representation for 983 OBC communities. So they have been left out in the reservation benefit. So reservation has not touched them at all. So that is the scenario that Rohini Commission has come up. And just 10% of the OBC communities have accrued 24.95% of jobs and admissions. So there is disproportionate, that is asymmetrical distribution of reservation that the G. Rohini Commission has come up with. So this is the observation that G. Rohini Commission has done. So there is an asymmetrical distribution, that is, there is a large community from the OBC who are untouched by the reservation. So they are still backward, they are still deprived. So that is what G. Rohini Commission wants to talk about. So it is necessary that G. Rohini Commission will subcategorize this 10% of the OBC communities, or 25% of this OBC communities who have already enjoyed and have lived uplifted by the reservation benefit. Only the rest of the pink people have to be given this benefit of reservation for OBC. So that is what the G. Rohini Commission will do on a subcategorization. So that also you have to understand. Then what is the reason why the reservation has not been trickling down to those who are most backward in the OBC community? This you have to understand. The reason is hardly there been any data to assess the socio-economic conditions of varied social groups at more local levels. No data, no proper policy to touch them. To focus them, to properly target them. So targeted benefits, targeted reservation, or this targeted benefit of reservation will not go to the population if you're not properly counting them, if you're not properly knowing which people is not getting it, which people are getting it. So hardly there have been any data is what the problem is. So there is a demand for the caste census. So those state chief minister is demand is very justified when on the perspective of this author. So caste census is necessary is what this author is saying. So hardly there have been any data to assess the socio-economic conditions of varied social groups at more local levels. And new opportunities provided by liberalization could not be grabbed as many were dependent on traditional source of income. What this author says is that there is an OBC community. This OBC community is suddenly getting the policy of LPG, that is liberalization, privatization, and globalization in 1991. When this OBC community is facing competition from the MNC, like the foreign companies, because there is a liberalization, privatization, and globalization. But this competition may have uplifted certain individuals in the OBC community, but not those who are traditionally or who are having some traditional sector of employment. Say, for example, if they are doing handicrafts, say handlooms. Say a handloom company cannot now beat with the powerloom company and also not beat with the powerloom company, which is situated in the foreign. So those who are dependent on the handloom sector will not be able to compete with the foreign countries or in the powerloom sectors, and there will be job loss and there will be a major hit in their income, source of income. So that is the problem for these people who are having traditional sector of employment or traditional source of income. So liberalization has not given the benefit of economic growth which the country faced. That is, in 1991, after LPG, we actually our country was actually growing around 7% to 8% GDP. But still, there are certain people who are unable to gain the benefit of liberalization because their nature of job is attached to a traditional sector, which will not be able to compete with the foreign companies, and they will be left out. So this is the scenario that the people of traditional source of income face, who are those who are from the OBC communities, what the author is saying. And more private sector employment and universities where no reservation is applicable. So you are giving reservation, yes, but you are giving reservation only in the public sectors and the public educational universities. But the people are going to private sector employment and private sector universities. So how the reservation will benefit them? No, because now mostly the students are going to the private universities or private colleges. There is no reservation benefits there. So they will be left out again. So this is what the author is saying. Competitive populism, rather than improving the conditions of government institution. This is another major problem that you have to understand. So what is this competitive populism? There is another word I also will introduce here, that is mandalization of politics. What is this mandalization of politics? Mandalization of politics. So what is this mandalization of politics? Mandal, B.P. Mandal. So B.P. Mandal was the head of the Second Backward Class Commission. So Second Backward Class Commission was constituted by the government and the head was B.P. Mandal. His job, that the commission's job, that is Second Backward Class Commission job, was to give reservation to the OBC communities. That is to understand, to find out who are the backward communities, and then they will give the reservation. They will tell how much reservation to be given to how much backward classes. So this is what the purpose of the B.P. Mandal Commission was. So this B.P. Mandal Commission find out that there are 52% of the people who are backward. They are called as OBC now. So he given a suggestion that 27% reservation must be given to those people who are backward. That is the OBC community. So B.P. Mandal Commission said that 27% reservation should be given to this OBC. then started this Mandalization of politics. That is, for the vote bank, the politicians started giving reservation for OBC. Like they started giving, like in Tamil Nadu, or they started giving reservation for this one year cooler, or this in this community or that community, like that. The different state governments started giving reservation for this OBC and that OBC. They started including this community into the OBC, and the reservations will be applicable to them, like that. There was a vote bank competition. Okay, those politicians started giving competitive populism. That is, this reservation became a populist measure to attract the people and attract the people to vote for them. So the politician used the reservation as a tool to attract the OBC community to vote for them. So that is called as competitive populism. So this started, and this is also called as Mandalization of politics. So competitive populism, rather than improving the condition of government institutions. So what this competitive populism started, when this competitive populism started, this competitive populism started giving only reservation to the people rather than improving the government institutions. Say, for example, recently, the Odisha government gave reservation for the government school students in the medical and engineering college admission. So there is a reservation for the government school students. Even in Tamil Nadu, there is a reservation for Tamil medium students. Well, good. But whether they're improving the government institution, no. There was this criticism in one of the editorial that I have pointed out in the previous slide, that Odisha government is good. It is that reservation it is giving for the government school students for medical and engineering colleges is good. But whether the government institutions are being improved for them, for the students to be enabled to compete equally with the other students, no. So this is the one very pathetic situation that we are facing. We are not promoting the knowledge level of the students who are studying in the government schools. So the student or the parents are not admitting the students to the government schools, and they are going to the private schools. Where in the private schools there is no reservation benefits, but still the parents are struggling to get the education to the students from the private institutions. So the government is the missing the right targeting, that the government institutions quality has to be improved rather than providing the reservation, which is no way getting any improvement for those students. So the students with very poor knowledge will get into the colleges with this reservation alone. This will not create a better situation, but it will worsen the situation, is what the author is talking about. What is the way forward? So way forward is this: the accountable system. That is, a reservation, yes, it must be provided, but the government institution must also be, the quality of the government institution must also be improved, is what the author is saying. And also, whenever the reservation is provided, there should also be an outcome test which must be there. So what is this outcome test? I already told you what is the outcome of the reservation. Only a few sections of the people are getting the benefits and not the other people who are getting the benefits. So this people who are not getting the benefits must be targeted properly. So that is what the author is saying. So the system must be accountable to those beneficiary, whether the beneficiary is getting the proper reservation benefits, and the other section who already got the benefits must be taken out. This is what accountable system that the author is talking about. Then the sensitive system, understanding differential needs of each subgroup. This also you must understand. Say, for example, there is an SC community. There is a women community. Both are vulnerable communities. Both are backward communities in the perspective of the society. Because the woman is not getting enough benefits, they are backward. Say, for example, in a family, usually the male has a cell phone while the woman does not have a cell phone. So this is one typical situation that the woman faces. She in scenarios where I have seen my friends where suddenly the girls will drop out and the parents will place her in a government Tamil medium schools, while their brothers will continue schooling in the English medium schools and even in a private school. So this is a scenario which the woman also faces backwardness. So backwardness for the woman and the SC, fine, good. But whether the problem of the SC is similar to women, no. Whether the problem of a caste, say for example, an X caste in SC is similar to the problem of Y caste in SC, no, it is not. So a sensitive system which understands the differential needs of each subgroup in the SC itself or in OBC itself must be there. Though it may sound very difficult, but it is possible. Context sensitive, evidence based policy decisions. So whenever you have the evidence in sense of which caste is very backward and which caste is getting the benefits, if you have this evidence, then it is good that you will create a policy of affirmative action which is able to target those castes which are not getting the benefits and leave out those castes which are getting the benefits. So the evidence-based policy decision, which means in turn means that the author is asking for a caste census which will provide the evidence, is what the author is saying. So the caste census will provide the evidence. So this evidence-based policy decision will better refine or revitalize the India's reservation system, is what the author is talking about. And also the author is suggesting that let's have an equal opportunities commission like USA. What is this equal opportunity commission will do? This equal opportunity commission will create a deprivation index. So this deprivation index will rank the community and say whether this community is most backward, extremely backward, or any range of backwardness, is what this deprivation index will identify each caste. So differential needs will be understood. So when the differential needs are understood, we will be refining our reservation accordingly. So deprivation index will provide the evidence which will tell you what is the differential needs of each of the subgroup in a community or a OBC community or SC community, and then we will identify how much reservation and how far the reservation to be given to each subgroup. So this Equal Opportunity Commission in USA and UK will do that. So we can also adopt a similar policy like USA. So that is what the author is giving. So the deprivation index from the socio-economic caste census. So this census was started in 2011, wherein the economic backwardness and the caste census will be taken. So the census of caste and social economic backwardness was taken, but the caste census was not done, but social and economic backwardness census was taken. So there is still a caste census which is not taken. So there is a demand for caste census. So this you have to understand. And the author is saying, take this caste census as well as socially and economically backward census, so that there is a deprivation index which can be created, and this deprivation index will tell you what is the differential needs of the people, and then the reservation can be given to them accordingly, is what the author is saying. And this Equal Opportunity Commission will do one more thing. What they will do, they will not only tell how much reservation, how much they are, each community is deprived and how much reservation must be given to each community, they will also audit on performance of employers and educational institutions on non-discrimination, equal opportunity. That is whether the employees, that is the employers of PSUs, are properly providing the reservation benefits and they are not discriminating anyone. And the central universities which are providing the reservation is not discriminating anyone. That will be checked by the Equal Opportunity Commission. They will audit the employees as well as educational institutions for non-discrimination and equal opportunity. And they will issue codes of good practice on different sectors. Say, for example, there is one PSU which is providing better reservation benefits, and they are providing equal opportunity to all with the best technique. So that technique will be considered as a good practice, and this good practice will be told to everyone. Please do follow this good practice of this particular PSU. So that is how the Equal Opportunity Commission will work for the betterment of the improvement of the OBC community, is what the author is saying. So this is about the previous editorial. So there is something which is adding up to this editorial, that is refining the reservation policy, which was there in the 8th September. So this reservation policy must be refined, is what the author is saying. What is the premise? This Tamil Nadu Assembly adopted a bill to provide 10.5% reservation for Vanyakula Kshatriyas within NDC and DNC, that is denotified communities. So this is what the context of this particular editorial is. So let's see the points to be noted. Supreme Court in 102nd Constitutional Amendment said states not have power to identify this socially and economically backward classes. So this you have to understand. This 102nd Constitutional Amendment had two important features. It had included Article 338B and 342A. What is this 338B is that it has created a national commission for backward classes. And this 342A has said that President will identify the backward classes and it will include them in the OBC. And the Parliament will add or delete those backward classes. This you have to understand. So Supreme Court said it is the President who has to add or delete those backward classes. That is the community which is included in the backward classes. So not the state government. So the state government has no power to identify the backward classes, is what the Supreme Court in interpreting this 102nd Constitutional Amendment has said. But the Parliament has jumped into and said that no, the state also has this power to identify the backward classes. So in this 105th Constitutional Amendment, which was passed recently, the central government has empowered the state to create their own list of social and economically backward classes. It has been passed unanimously. So this you have to understand. So Supreme Court has said, no, the state government does not have this power, but now the state government's power has been restored. Now, what is the reforms needed in? Revisiting 50% ceiling limit given in Indira Sani case. What is this Indira Sani case? Indira Sani case was after this Mandal Commission, which has given 27% reservation, which has suggested 27% reservation for OBC. And the government also gave this 27% reservation for OBC. But the Supreme Court in Indira Sani case said that, okay, you give this OBC reservation as much as 27%, but together with OBC, SC, ST, and any other reservation to any other community, okay, give them. But together, it should be only within 50%. It should not never exceed 50% is what the Supreme Court said in this Indira Sani case. Indira Sani case is also important to note that this creamy layer was to be devised from this OBC community, and they have to be given no reservation. This is also there in the Indira Sani case. So the author is saying we should revisit this 50% ceiling limit, because this 50% ceiling limit is given by the judiciary, and the judiciary themselves said that yes, 50% is the rule, but 50% can be exceeded only under extraordinary circumstances, like the circumstances that was there in the Tamil Nadu. So Tamil Nadu is having 69% reservation under this extraordinary circumstances. But the Maratha reservation, which was given by the Maharashtra government, has been ruled out because this Maratha reservation has exceeded this 50% ceiling limit. This you have to understand. But you also have to note, friends, EWS, that is economically weaker section, also have given reservation of 10%, which also exceed 50%, but the court has not come up with the proper judgment for this EWS. So if the EWS reservation is still continuing, let's see what if the court is declaring whether EWS is wrong or not, right, because it is exceeding this 50% ceiling limit. So let's put this question popping up till the court is coming up with an answer for this. So, but the answer for this is that, answer for the other is that the 50% ceiling limit is the rule. But the author is saying, please do revisit this 50% ceiling limit, is what the author is saying, which this 50% ceiling limit was given in this Indira Sahni case, which was a landmark case which you have to study. And the criteria for seeing income limit for creamy layer in OBC must also be revisited, is what the author is saying. So income limit for creamy layer, as you all know, now it is 8 lakh. But there was a recent judgment that is Supreme Court said that only the income must not be looked for telling who is the creamy layer. Here now, actually, you have to know the salary is not considered as for the creamy layer. Only the income from other sources is considered for the creamy layer. That is income from other sources. If it is exceeding 8 lakhs, then they'll be in the creamy layer and there will be no reservation for them. So the author is saying, please tell what is the criteria for telling which is the income level, is what the author is saying. So there must be a criteria, and this criteria of income limit must must be defined. Say, for example, if the criteria is, say, for example, GDP. So in this year, if this year the GDP is 5%, the income limit will be this 8 lakhs. When the next year, if the GDP is 6%, the income limit will be 9 lakhs. If the GDP is 4% next year, the income limit will be 6 lakh or something. So like that, the author is saying, please have a criteria so that the income limit set based on that, and there is a revision of the income limit every then and there, and then the creamy layer is chalked out from there. So that is what the author is saying, because there is no criteria for now. And the subcategorization of OBC must also be done properly, because as I told you, there is only few sections of the people who are getting the benefits and not the other sections. So there is the need for a subcategorization of OBC, so that you are understanding who are extremely backward and who are backward, who are moderate. So like this, if you understand those subcategorization, you will better target them. That is what the author is saying. And vacancies in post of OBC have to be filled expeditiously. This is one important scenario also, friends, because you give them reservation, fine. But whether all the OBC community are actually getting this reservation, there is a lots of reservation quota which is unfilled. So there is a vacancy. If you all see in Anna University counseling and all, Anna University counseling will happen every year, as you all know. When the Anna University counseling happens, there is a certain, say for example, 285 quotas. Just a crude number I'm giving. 285 is the number of seats which are given for the OBC, sorry, SC. Okay, there is only around 200 which is filled. So 85 will go as a vacancy. So this is called as a backlog. There is something which is important about backlog, which we will study in this Indira Sahni case. If at all needed in the next editorial, I'll talk about, because that is not needed in this current context. So I'm leaving that to as present. But we will have a separate class about what are the important judgments in various landmark cases in another important classes. So this backlog is there. So this backlog is also called as vacancies or unfilled seats, unfilled quota. So there is a vacancy in post of OBC, and that have to be filled expeditiously, whether it is in the government universities or in the jobs. I mean the public sector jobs also. It has to be expeditiously filled, is what the author is saying. Then the next topic, the judicial role in improving lawmaking. Again, the judiciary is the is what the author is talking about. What is the judiciary's role in improving lawmaking? So this is important because it is in the general studies 2, separation of powers between various organs, dispute redressal mechanisms and institutions. So the author is talking about, we cannot blame only the parliament. And also the parliament, if at all not doing anything, we should think what is next. The next is what the judiciary has to do. Because parliament has not done its work properly, then the judiciary have to make them do its work properly, is what the author is trying to say. Let's see what is the strong point now. The premise is, the Chief Justice of India in Independence Day speech expressed concern on sorry state of parliament. What is the sorry state of parliament? I mean here, the sorry state of parliament is there is no deliberation, and there is hasty passage of many laws. So the hasty passage of many laws is another important problem, because when it is very hasty means they are passing the laws in just 20 minutes without proper discussion. So if the laws are passed like that, there will be lots of ambiguities. What does this ambiguity means? It will be unclear, and it may lead to the state affecting the rights of the citizens, that is fundamental rights of the citizens. So there can be some provision which can affect the privacy of the individual, or it can affect the movement of the people. Like that, there can be any laws, because it is not discussed properly. You are not seeing the details of the laws properly because it is hastily passed. So there will be lots of ambiguities, and there is lots of opportunities for the state to curb the fundamental rights of the citizen, is what the author is talking about. And the CJI is showing concern because of that. And no due deliberation, hasty legislations. So there is an ambiguity and gaps in laws. Gaps means the laws are not comprehensive. The laws are not covering every aspect of it. Say, for example, if it is a motor bill, like a motor vehicle bill, the motor vehicle bill is not covering the helmet rule, say, for example. So that is a gap in the law. So that is created, and that will create an avoidable litigation. What is this avoidable litigation means? That is, litigation means dispute. So dispute will rise because the law is not proper, law is not duly deliberated. So there will be unnecessary dispute which could have been avoided if there is a proper discussion happened in the parliament. So that is what the Chief Justice is saying. So Chief Justice in turn means that if the parliament is not passing a law properly, there will be citizens who are contesting against the law. And so there will be lots of cases pushed to the courts, and the court will again be burdened with lots of cases, and there will be a pendency of cases. So that is what the author is talking about. That is what the Chief Justice of India expressed concern, as well as the author has told the same. Okay. So lawyers and intellectuals should enter public life to improve deliberation, is what the author is saying. The Chief Justice of India is saying this is very important, because Chief Justice of India is saying when lawyers and intellectuals are coming into the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, they will in turn provide intellectual insights into the laws and policy making. So, and then they will improve the debates, the nature of the debates, because they will not be creating a ruckus in the parliament like the politicians do, like tearing the papers or bullying the other people, or even barricading the speaker. Like that, there is a problem. So those will not happen when the lawyers and intellectuals who are professionals are coming into this parliament, that is Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, is what the Chief Justice of India feels. And points to be noted. Efficiency of parliament measured in number of bills passed is flawed, is what the author is saying. That is, Parliament, the efficiency of the parliament, if it is measured in the number of bills passed, it is flawed because number of bills is passed like just like that without any discussion. Without any discussion, the laws is so fragile to the fragile because it is affecting the fundamental rights. It is having lots of ambiguities. It is having lots of gaps. Is what the author is saying. So the efficiency of parliament should not be measured in the number of bills passed, whether it is 20 or more. There is no proper discussion. Whether even if it is one bill which is passed, it should be with proper, perfect law. That is what the author is saying. And what is the legislators law? Due care in voting and deliberation must be there. So a legislature, whether it is MP or MLA, he should vote and properly discuss or deliberate on the particular law properly with due care is what the author is saying, and represent diverse interest groups. So the author must give a perspective of a transgender, perspective of a woman, what a woman will feel from this law, what a child will experience from this law, what a job going people will experience from this law. What like this perspective of different interest groups must be given into the law. And rushed lawmaking, that is the hasty lawmaking, will cause a situation where the parliament becomes a mere rubber stamp. So ஒரு law வந்து அவசரமா பண்ணாங்கன்னா அந்த அவசரமா பண்ற law வந்து என்ன ஆகும், ஜஸ்ட் பார்லிமெண்ட் வந்து டிஸ்கஷனே இல்லாம பாஸ் பண்ணிருச்சுன்னா அது ஒரு ரப்பர் ஸ்டாம்ப் மாதிரி தானே. சும்மா நான் வந்து உங்களுக்கு ஒரு ஒரு பத்திரம் கொடுக்குறேன், அந்த பத்திரத்தை நீங்க படிச்சு பார்க்காமயே சைன் போட்டு கொடுக்குற மாதிரி தானே. சோ அதனால படிச்சு கூட பார்க்காம டிஸ்கஸே பண்ணாம பார்லிமெண்ட் பண்ணுச்சுன்னா அது வந்து வெறும் ரப்பர் ஸ்டாம்ப் அப்படின்னு சொல்லிட்டு the author is saying. So rushed lawmaking creates a parliament which is mere rubber stamp. So in the word வந்து you can use the mere rubber stamp. In the word வந்து please use it in your answer writing whenever you are talking about the parliament's problem. And this affects equal participation and fundamental rights of the people. Because parliament is there to create a law. And this law must be properly discussed, and there should not be any scope for affecting the fundamental rights. And this law must create a scope for equal participation of all the people. If it is not, then it will be a problem. And what is the judiciary role? So legislature role, legislator or MP MLA has to properly discuss and properly vote only if he feels the bill is right. This is what the legislator's role is. What is the judiciary role? The judiciary role, 1, enforcing the text and spirit of the constitutional provisions governing legislative process. So whether the constitution text and spirit is expressed in the law, the judiciary has to test. Then voice, but this does not happen because voice vote violates Article 100, which requires majority support to pass a bill. Here you have to understand, friends, Article 100 tells that a bill will be passed only if there is a majority support. Majority support means 50% plus 1. So this is the need for the bill to get passed in a parliament. That is whether in the Lok Sabha or Rajya Sabha. But voice vote of yeas and no's or yes and no, say for example, the voice vote, the speaker, say for example, a Citizenship Amendment Act comes in Rajya Sabha. There will be the chairman of the Rajya Sabha will call for a voice vote of this Citizenship Amendment Act, sorry, Amendment Bill. So this voice vote, the people will start saying yes, no, yes, no. So the chairman will say, I hear more yes, so the bill gets passed. Just like that. Whether there is a number of no's and there is no counting of number of yes and no. Just like that, if I'm hearing lots of voices for yes, so I'm passing this law. This is very unscientific. This is very, very, very poor in maths to say for that. So a voice vote violates Article 100 because if there is no majority support, a bill must not get passed. That is what the Article 100 says. So voice vote violates Article 100, which requires majority support to pass a bill. Example, the farm laws was passed in Rajya Sabha by voice vote. So you are facing this problem. The farm law was not properly discussed and it's not having a majority support in the parliament, but it got passed and now it is facing the problem that the farmers are protesting against it. So that is what the author is saying. Article 100 is one of the constitutional provision which requiring majority support. It should have been emphasized. So the farm laws on the ground that it is violating Article 100, that is, which is the text and spirit of the constitutional provision, the judiciary can say this farm laws is not passed. So judiciary has to come now because a procedure which says that should be a majority support for a bill has been violated. So constitutional provision of 100 is violated. So judiciary has to say such a law must not be coming. So judiciary role is coming there in this lawmaking process. Other passed is money bill to bypass Rajya Sabha. Students, you have to understand that whenever a bill is getting passed, the speaker will identify whether it is money bill or not. When it is a money bill, it need not get the assent of the Rajya Sabha. Though it goes to the Rajya Sabha and gets their suggestions, but this are mere suggestions. They are not binding on the Lok Sabha. So the the Lok Sabha, the Lok Sabha can take this particular money bill or not. Sorry, this Lok Sabha can take the suggestions from the Rajya Sabha or not, and then get the bill passed. So money bill will make this Rajya Sabha just a supervising body rather than a authoritative body. So whenever a bill gets passed as money bill, the Rajya Sabha has very unequal, very low power than the Lok Sabha. So the other actually got passed as a money bill, but money bill was mentioned in Article 110. So whatever provision which is given in the Article 110, if it is there in the bill, then it is called as a money bill, but otherwise it is not. But other only have few mention about the money, but now it has been passed as a money bill and it has bypassed Rajya Sabha. So the constitutional provision which is given in the Article 110 for identifying the money bill has been not properly followed by the Lok Sabha. So this other is also can be ruled out because it has not followed Article 110. So that is what the author is saying. This has to happen timely. Though other and this farm law has a problem that it violated Article 100 and Article 110, the court has not come categorically and timely to rule out that this has violated this Article 100 and Article 110. So farm law should be revisited by the parliament and this other should be revisited by the parliament. The judiciary has not come up categorically and saying that this against the parliament. So that is one problem that the author is saying. So judiciary has to play a role, proper role here is what the author is saying. And one more thing, judiciary to make deliberation a factor in evaluating the constitutional validity of laws is one thing. When whether a law has been discussed properly in the parliament, the judiciary has to check on that, is what the author is saying. Because parliament is not discussing a bill properly. Who will ensure that the bill is properly discussed? It is the judiciary. So author is saying, please judiciary do this. Please judiciary ask parliament to properly discuss on the law. That is what the author is asking. And the author is saying that there should be a deliberation on the particular law. And the law must satisfy these conditions, is what the author is saying. It should evaluate the factual basis justifying the law, suitability of law, necessity and proportionality of law to justify its aim, and impact on fundamental rights. I will give you a crude example. Let's take reservation as one example. So reservation, let's say reservation is a law. So the one OBC community is having a reservation. So whenever there is a law which is giving reservation for OBC, there should be a factual basis justifying the law. So what is this factual basis? There must be a census which says that these are the communities who are backward. So there is a factual basis for justifying this reservation. And suitability of law to justify its aim. Whether backwardness will be reduced by reservation must be justified. So the suitability of reservation to reduce this backwardness must be justified is what the author is saying. And necessity and proportionality of law to justify its aim. So the necessity of reservation and proportionality of reservation. So necessity of reservation. So whether this reservation will reduce this backwardness, fine, then it is necessary. And proportionality, that is whether 27% reservation is enough for those people who are backward, and whether this 27% is proportional to the backward community has to be checked, and whether this reservation will have any impact on the fundamental rights, whether positive impact and negative impact, that also have to be tested. So these must be deliberated, that is discussed in the parliament. The judiciary has to ensure that. So that is what the author is saying. In Indian Hotel and Restaurant Association case, again, this case was discussed in this particular editorial, saying that this Indian Hotel and Restaurant Association has raised a case against the state government, which has banned the dancing in hotels which are less than 5-star. So those hotels which are less than 3-star hotels cannot have dancing party. So this was ruled out by the Supreme Court because it is unequal. Only less than 3-star hotels cannot have dance. So that was unequal law. So that is how the Supreme Court has made null and void the state government's directive. So this is one important case that the author is discussing. And in the third point, the author is saying judiciary can make a deliberation a factor in applying doctrine of presumption of constitutionality. So this is an important doctrine, friends. As you all know, judicial review is in Article 13. So Article 13 talks about judicial review. In this judicial review, the Supreme Court and the High Court will see whether the law is constitutional or not, whether this law is affecting any part of the Constitution or not, or is it violating any part of the Constitution or not. But the court will not usually do that. It will presume that all the laws which are passed by the Parliament are constitutional. Only if there is a complaint against the constitutionality of any law, then the court will take up, and then they will say that there are some provisions which are unconstitutional. Say, for example, Section 377. It was there, Section 377, which decriminalized the same-sex, consensual same-sex. So same-sex relation has been made unconstitutional just now because there is a doctrine of presumption of constitutionality. So Section 377 was presumed to be constitutional for many decades. Only now, after a complaint has been raised, this Section 377, which has criminalized same-sex relation, has now been made unconstitutional and it has been decriminalized. But now the author is saying that don't please presume that every laws are constitutional. Now, every laws can be constitutional only if it is properly discussed in the Parliament, is what the author is saying. So judiciary can presume constitutionality of a law only if it is properly discussed in the Parliament. Otherwise, they can take the law and say that whether it is constitutional or not. So that is what the author is saying. So this is important, students, please make a note of it. And if you have doubts, please post it in the comment box. And way forward is this: correcting legislative dysfunction from within not affect separation of powers. That is what I mean by here is that Legislative is now dysfunctioning. That is, it is not properly discussing and it is not properly so it is not properly discussing and not properly passing the laws. So there is a need for correcting this legislative dysfunction. But it will have to happen within, because the judiciary cannot interfere in the parliament, because there is something called a separation of powers. So judiciary cannot easily interfere in all the parliamentary proceedings. This is there in the constitution. That is, constitution says that judiciary should not interfere in the parliamentary proceedings, because only the chairman is the chairman of the Rajya Sabha and the speaker of the Lok Sabha is having the deciding authority in the whatever happening in the parliamentary proceeding. So this is the separation of power. But now, so the author is suggesting that this must be properly corrected by the judiciary, because judiciary has to come into this problem, because legislative is not functioning properly, because it is not reforming within also. This you have to note, friends. The legislature, whatever problem is happening there, it has to be reformed within itself. But now it is not happening, so the judiciary has to now come and play a role by nudging. That is, but judiciary have to nudge legislators in doing so. It has to remedy the procedural defects in the law apart from judicial review on substantial grounds. Then we will talk about the spirit of federalism lies in consultation. This is important because this is in general studies too. Functions and responsibilities of the union and states, issues and challenges pertaining to the federal structure. So let's get into the topic. The premise. The state government raised concerns over central government unilaterally creating laws on concurrent list of 7th schedule of the Constitution. As you all know, in the 7th schedule of the Constitution, there are 3 lists. One is central list, state list, and the concurrent list. So in the central list, the center has the sole authority to create law, and in the state government, in the state list, it is the state government who has the sole authority, and in the concurrent list, it is the both. But here, the state government is raising concern that though the list, the domain is in this concurrent list, but it is the center which is dominating and creating law, and it is not discussing with the state, which is also having a stake in those subjects. So that is what the problem is. So let's see what is the points to be noted from this particular editorial. Essence of federalism. Students, I will tell you something called as qualifiers. Qualifiers are the say for example, principle of federalism, essence of federalism, spirit of federalism. You are qualifying the word federalism using principle of, essence of, spirit of. So these are the words which are called as qualifiers. Please use those qualifiers in your mains answer writing, especially in your ethics, like maxim of righteousness or maxim of empathy. So like this, you can use our principle of righteousness, or like this. So use this qualifiers in your mains answer writing to add marks. Okay. Then, so essence of federalism. So there is a discussion with state government, which is the essence of federalism. So in all federalism, as you all know, the whole country is divided with different states with strong union. This is the form of federalism that we have in India. So we have a more united way of federal countries, federal structure. So this federal structure requires discussion with state government is what the author is saying. That is the essence of federalism. So discussion with state government in enacting laws on concurrent list is what required, is what the author is saying. Farm laws. So we will be discussing certain important examples telling that where the federalism has been affected and what should be the way forward. So in the farm laws, entry 14, which is the agriculture, is in state list. But Parliament used entry 33, which is trade and commerce class of concurrent list, to create a law, that is the three recent farm law bills. So farm laws. So this farm reform laws. So this is very important. The Parliament has used subject matter in the concurrent list, and this has uh, subject matter also in the state list. But using the concurrent list, the Parliament has created a law, so the state government is against that. And you have to understand this doctrine of pith and substances. So students have introduced two doctrines that is there used in the judiciary. So doctrine of pith and substance in State of Bombay versus F.N. Balsara case. This is about legislative competence. What is this legislative competence? Legislative competence means, say for example, I told you in 7th schedule, you have central list, state list, and concurrent list. So the subject matter which is there in the central list, only the Parliament has the competence, legislative competence, to create a law on this list in the central list in the 7th schedule. And in the state list, only the state government has the legislative competence to create a law on the state list, that is subject matter in the state list. And in concurrent list, both Parliament and the state government has the legislative competence to create a law. So legislative competence means who is having the authority to use such power. So who is having the power? So in this, legislative power is with the center in the central list, the state in the state list, and in the both in the concurrent list. So this doctrine of pith and substances will talk about who is having the competence, whether it is the central government or the state government. So that will be seen through the pith and substance of a law. So say for example, there is a formula. In this formula, what is the pith? It is the agriculture which is the pith. So agriculture being a pith, only the state government can create a law, because entry 14 of state list contains agriculture, which is the pith and substance of the formula. So this is what the state government is raising concerns. See, this agriculture, which is the matter of the state list, so the state government only have to create a law on the farming rather than the central government. But the central government has used this trade and commerce clause of concurrent list to create a law on this farming marketing and all. So the state government is saying no, the farm laws is not under the legislative competence of the Parliament, but it's the legislative competence of the state government, because it is there in the entry 14 agriculture of state list. So this is the contestation of the state government. And Major Ports Authorities Act 2021, this 2021 Act of that is regulating the major ports has made this local laws which are already present, especially in Goa, to become redundant. So Goa is opposing. You have to note that Goa is actually ruled by the BJP government in the state, Goa state. But still they are against this Major Ports Authorities Act 2021, because the state government's role is now bypassed by the central government. So there is a problem. And even the local laws which were used earlier is now being superseded by this Major Ports Authorities Act. So that is again creating a problem. And there is something called New Draft Indian Ports Bill 2021, where control of non-major ports is shifted from the central government to a Maritime State Development Council, which is in which the members are appointed by majority the central government only. So the state government is saying, you're not having any role in controlling the non-major port is what the central government is saying. You're taking the power away from us. We are earlier were controlling this non-major ports, and now there is a council which were appointed by the central government in majority are now controlling the non-major ports. So the state government is telling we are losing our power. So they are contesting. But the central government is saying that it is there in the entry 31 of concurrent list. So we have a power to create a law is what the author is, the central government is saying. And there is something called as Electricity Amendment Bill 2020, and also the similar situation. That is, the regulation of sector is shifted to the State Electricity Regulation Commission from a committee which was earlier appointed by state government. And in this also you should note, friends, concurrent list that is there in the 7th schedule was taken from the Government of India Act 1935. Because in this concurrent list, there is some subjects of common interest, wherein both Parliament and the state government can create a law. So the subject of common interest and laws to ensure uniformity can be put in it. So there is a need for uniformity whenever there is a law which is created under the subject matter in the concurrent list. And Constitution Assembly member KTM Ahmed had this fear of central government high-handedness in concurrent list. Just because a matter is there in the concurrent list, the parliament will take precedence and they will create a law on that. And do not consult with the state government, do not give a scope for the state government to create a law on it. This is what the fear of this KTM Ahmed, who was a constitutional maker. And Sarkaria Commission report also said that the process of mutual consult and cooperation must be there. The central government should limit its power on concurrent lists for ensuring uniformity on basic issues of national policy. So what is the Sarkaria Commission saying? Whatever subject matter is there in the concurrent list. So concurrent list, whatever subject matter is there, central government can create a law only if there is a need for uniformity. Otherwise, central government should lead the way for state government to create a law on it. So central government வந்து யூனிஃபார்மிட்டி தேவைன்னா மட்டும் அதுல லா கிரியேட் பண்ணுங்க, இல்லைன்னா ஸ்டேட் கவர்மெண்ட் வந்து லா கிரியேட் பண்ணிட்டு போட்டோம் அப்படின்னு விட்டுருங்கன்னு சர்க்காரிய கமிஷனை செய்யும். Then National Commission for Review of Working of the Constitution. This is also one of the commission which was constituted under Venkatachalaya. So this commission is saying there should be interstate council formed permanently under Article 263. So Article 263 already said that should be an interstate council, but this commission is saying that it should be made permanent, and it should talk about the cooperation that the state and the center can have on the subject matter of concurrent list. And in SR Bommai case also, the states are not mere appendages of the union, and the central government should not trample their power, is what this Supreme Court has said in the SR Bommai case. So just because the union, the India is having a quasi-federal structure, this you have to note, friends, quasi-federal structure, or they call it federal sui generis. Sui generis. What this all means is, we don't have a strict federal structure. We have a federal bias with strong union. So we have a strong union government. So we don't have a mention of federation in any of the any part of the constitution. So we have a quasi-federal structure. There is something called as features of the federal government, which we have only certain features, and we don't have every features. Like dual constitution or dual citizenship, we don't have that. We have only single constitution and single citizenship. And we also, so it is called as quasi-federal. That is, we are semi-federal. And there is some authors who are saying we are federal sui generis, which means that we are a new unique form of federal structure, that is federal structure of its own. That is, we have our unique way of having a federal structure. We are not having any federal system that the US is having, a strict federal system like US. We have our own kind of federal system is what the some authors are saying. So we may be calling it as federal sui generis or quasi-federal or federal bias with strong union, or you can call this uh, call any other form of words. So that is what the author is saying. So we have to ensure that the state government, central government is not legislating on subject matter of concurrent list uh, in on every matter of concurrent list, but only when it is requiring uniformity, as the Sarkaria Commission has said, and also whenever it is creating a law on concurrent list, it must also create an interstate council and discuss those matters as NCRW has said. So this you can make a point in your answer writing. Then the next topic is economic reforms, looking back to look ahead. So this is because there is a important topic in the syllabus, General Studies 3, Indian economy and issues relating to planning, mobilization of resources, growth, development, and employment. So let's get into the topic. The premise: the COVID pandemic set the trigger for fresh thinking and approaches to manage the economy and future of humanity. What are the points to be noted? So here, as the topic talks about economic reforms, looking back to look ahead. So we are looking back, which is in 1990 reforms, so that we are learning some lessons from that 1990 reforms, and we are pursuing a fresh thinking and approaches because we have this COVID pandemic. So what is the achievement or the outcome of 1990 reforms? 1990 reforms created a liberalization of economy and trade. That led to increase in the foreign exchange reserves, sustained the manufacturing contribution to GDP. So the manufacturing grew, exports grew, ICT software exports grew, economic growth also grew. So this is what 1919 reforms achievement were. What is the parameter that needed focus now? The author is saying human capital, but the author is also saying that 1990 reforms focused on technical nature of economy rather than the system, process, and people. So the 1990 reforms is only technically reformed our economy. It has not touched the system, process, and people. So let's touch those, is what the author is saying. So what the parameters we have to focus is human capital, technology readiness, labor productivity, disposable income, capital expenditure, process innovation, and setting up businesses and institutional capacity. So let's talk about each of these parameters, how it is affecting the economy and how we should focus on it. Let's see in this editorial. Human capital. So first, the author is taking this human capital topic. What is human capital? As you all know, the resource that can be accrued from the people. So all the people are working, all the people are doing some work towards the economic growth, whether you are employed in agriculture or manufacturing or any other jobs, you are contributing to the economy. That is human capital. The human capital affects labor productivity. So every human capital, if they are healthy, they are more productive. If they are unhealthy, they are less productive. So that is how the human capital affects labor productivity. And also human capital, if they are very skilled, they are more productive. If they are unskilled, they are little productive. This also you have to understand. So health, skill are matters of increasing the human capitals. So the human capital affects the labor productivity, but the labor productivity in India is just 40% of China. So just 1/3, a little higher than 1/3 of China. That is very poor, no? Yes. Why? Because there is a lack of quality of education, low skilled manpower, and inadequacy in healthcare. As I told you, if you're unhealthy, you're not productive. And if you have no skill and poor education, you're unskilled. And so there is a poor productivity. So there is a problem in that. And so, and also the rank in the Global Human Capital Report 2017 is that India is very poor. We are just 103, whereas Sri Lanka, others are rank of more than us. So this you have to understand. So the human capital is a problem because we are not properly educated, we are not properly skilled, we are not properly having a healthy body. And low per capita GDP in India from World Bank database. There is a low per capita GDP. Our income income is very low, or less. We have less disposable income. If you understand that from the World Bank database, we have only $2,104. World average per capita GDP is $11,429. This is very, very, very poor. This will affect demand. When you don't have money in your hand, you don't buy anything great like luxury cars or whatever. So that affects the demand in the economy. So that is what the author is saying. And there is a low R&D expenditure, that is research and development expenditure, which is nearly 0.8% of GDP. So this lowers the capacity for innovation and low technology readiness. And there is a low productivity. So whenever there is a low productivity, labor productivity, or even the productivity of the goods and services, if it is very low productivity, this will affect the competitiveness. India will not be able to compete with the other countries. And so there will be no proper manufacturing growth, exports, economic growth. So this is one problem that the author is talking about. And there is a lack of capital expenditure and institutional capacity. What is this capital expenditure? Say, for example, there is a capital expenditure on infrastructure. Say, for example, there is a metro rail, or there is some industries. That is also part of the capital expenditure. If you're not properly investing on metro rails or industries, which actually improves the conditions of the people, then there is a problem. So a lack of capital expenditure and institutional capacity, whether there is an institution of education or institution of companies, if it is on a poor condition, then it is also creating problem. This leads to difficulties in land acquisition for businesses, inefficient utilization of infrastructure and business services, leading to time and cost overrun for entrepreneurs. So this you have to note. So whenever there is no proper capital expenditure, there is no proper land acquisition. So where you can't buy the land, and if you cannot buy the land, you cannot utilize the infrastructure in those land, and there will be time and cost overrun, because the time will run up, because you are unable to buy the land. So the time and cost overrun will happen. This will affect the entrepreneurs because they need a land for business. They need to set up a business there, and they need to run. For the operation, they need certain infrastructure like waste processing or water. So such infrastructure for providing water, electricity, everything has to be provided for entrepreneurs to establish his enterprise. So that is lacking, is what the author is saying. And what is the way forward? Simple as that. So these are the important parameters. I have explained how the parameters is affecting the economic growth of the India, and what is the way forward is what the author is saying. Public sector outlay of 8% of GDP from current 5% for education, skill and health. So this will improve the human capital. So human capital will grow when there is proper education, skill and health. This will happen only when there is a 8% of GDP investment in the education, skill and health, not just 5%. Even it is actually less than 5% investment in education, skill and health. If you consider health, it is only 1.06%, sorry, 1.16% investment is there in the health, 1.16% of GDP. And if it is education, it is less than 4% of GDP. So this is not enough for the human capital progression. And enhancing research and development expenditure to 2% of GDP over next 3 years. So from 0.8%, they wanted to increase to 2%. And enhancing per capita income by more wages. That is, increase the wages to the people. Because when you increase the wages, the people will demand more. When there is a demand, there will be increase in the industries. When there is increase in industries, there will be lots of employment. When there is lots of employment, again, lots of wages, lot of income. So when there is increase in wages, there will be increase in demand. When there is increase in demand, there will be lots of industries coming up, through lots of investment happens, and lots of infrastructure also grows up. And when there is lots of infrastructure investment industries grows up, there will be lots of employment created. When there is lots of employment created, increase in wages, increase in demand. Similarly, so this virtuous cycle will go on. So that is what the author is saying. And this enhancing more wages, because there will be higher skills, minimum wages, and also social security net. So you should also ensure social security net also, like insurance facilities for the employee. This other way forward, which is given by this author, so simple as that. We will move on to the next syllabus, next editorial. The national security discourse is changing. This is very important because it is in the general studies 3 challenges to internal security. Let's put these points in the table. A global security landscape. You should understand what are the global security challenges. 1 is the China rise. 2, climate change. 3, counter-terrorism. That is, terrorism is another challenge. And then COVID-19. So China as a country is rising, and it is also aggressive in the sea lanes of communication like South China Sea. Climate change is one important threat to the development of the countries. And terrorism, again, COVID-19 pandemic is another threat, the author is saying. So these are the security challenges that the globe is having. And these are called as 4 C's. So 4 C's are China, climate change, counterterrorism, COVID-19 pandemic. What is the scenario of US? US security concerns are pandemic, economic crisis, climate crisis, technological disruption, threats to democracy, racial injustice, inequality in all forms. As you know, pandemic, economic crisis is well understood. Climate crisis also well understood. What is this technological disruption? Technological disruption happens because whenever, say for example, I'm buying a Note 8. Now Note 10 comes up. Now this Note 8 becomes redundant. So the technology of Note 8 to Note 10 has happened very, very fast. They say within 1 month. So there is a technology transfer. So there will be technological disruption. What do you mean by disruption? Say for example, a farmer, or say for example, there is an industry which is having a technology to create something. But now this technology has changed. There is an improvement in the technology. So the company has to buy this improvement in technology, but there is a lots of investment which has to happen. So the investment that have happened with this old machine will become of no use now, and they have to now create a new investment for this new machine. So this is the technological disruption will happen in the industry, and the industry will find very, very economic shock when there is a technological disruptions. So this is a problem. And threats to democracy, yes, important. As you all know, when the Trump government lost to the Biden's government, you have to understand that there was lots of problems. So that is a threat to democracy. And racial injustice, there was a killing of black man by a police officer by beating. So there is a lot of bullying of the racially backward community in the USA. That is one problem. And inequality in all forms, whether there is a income inequality, inequality of women, inequality of genders, everything is another problem in US. It's not, as you all know, it is not a superpower with no problem. It is having its own problem, as you have to note from this editorial. And again, we will talk about what is India's problem. India's realization of security. I have mentioned India's realization of security. That is, security problem is not just enemy at the door, at the border with the guns. It is not just that is the security problem. There are other forms of security problem which we have to understand. Not only warfare and defense is a security problem, but there is a problem of financial security. health security, food security, energy security, environmental security, information security. There is a security needs like cyber security. We have a need for security in these all dimensions, or in these all field, or in this all subject matter. So that is what India's realization of security. Let's see what is this national security discourse as the topic suggests. Distinction between domestic and foreign policy has fallen away. What the author is saying that our needs, which are our domestic needs, has tuned the foreign policy. So our national interest has fed the national foreign policy is what the author is saying. It is same for all the country. It whether USA or whatever, the national interest determines the foreign policy. But here, more into this national interest, it is the domestic problems which has fed the foreign policy. So India will do something now because there is something in the domestic happening now. India will do something then because that domestic matters are happening like that. Say for example, there is a farmer agitation. So farmer agitation is there. Say for example, if Britain is supporting this farmer agitation, our relation with Britain will not be very good at this time. But again, we will have a good relation with Britain after this farmers protest has gone out. So like this, there is a domestic challenges which actually determines the foreign policy is what the author is saying. This is also true with the other countries like US. US, they are talking about the problem of employment of the Americans. So there is in this American first policy, the US is restricting the visa provided for the other country people. So these are the reason, because the domestically the people wants jobs to be given to them rather than the going to the foreign people. So these are the domestic challenges. So the foreign policy is like that. That is the visa restrictions. And US to invest in people, sharpen innovative edge, and unite economically to grow middle class, reduce inequality, and counter predatory trade practice. So these are the priority for US now. That is to invest in people. That is to improve the education, skill, health of the people. That is to invest in the human capital or in the people. Sharpen innovative edge. That is to avoid this technological disruption. You have to invest on this innovative edge and unite economically to grow middle class. As you all know, this middle class is increasing or burgeoning now in all the countries. There is a focus on this middle class. Even Modi, Prime Minister Modi has focused on this middle class, and that is actually a vote bank now. Now the middle class, the class-wise vote bank has started instead of caste-wise vote bank. So unite economically to grow middle class, reduce inequality, and counter predatory trade practices like the practices that China does, like giving exporting their products to to a very low price, that those exported products actually wipe out all those domestic products. So that like this, there is a predatory trade practices which is happening. So that US wants to fight against this, what the author is saying. And shift from the need of bombers, nuclear missiles during Cold War to increasing domestic industrial-based critical technologies, resilient supply chains for critical goods, cyber security, climate actions. As I already told you, what are the challenges for the US? These are the solution that the US is taking. Instead of focusing on bombers, nuclear missiles, which was required only during Cold War, now it is focusing on increasing the domestic industrial base. This will create employment. This will reduce inequality. And in critical technologies, this will resolve technological disruption and resilient supply chains for critical goods. This is very important. And cyber security, climate actions. So these are the points that the author is saying that it will help in US to meet the security challenges it has. Because cyber security is also very important, because there is lots of spyware, lots of ransomware problem which is happening. Even cyber terrorism is one important aspect that is creating security challenges in this that is internet. And resilient supply chains for critical goods. Say, for example, there is a critical good of vaccine. So this vaccine has to fly from USA to India or from any other parts of the country of manufacturers to India. So there is a need for a resilient supply chains for critical goods. And India depended on Chinese manufacturing for critical supplies. This is also important. Here, as we have discussed about US problems and their strategy, now we have focused on India. India is dependent on Chinese manufacturing for critical supplies. Now I see most of my products here at my home are made in China. And not just that, the critical supplies are also from Chinese manufacturing. Consider we have a gun which is made of China. Do you think we have to that is the right way of enriching our defense? No, we are fighting against China in the borders, but now we have most of the critical supplies from China. That is very problematic, because when China closes the border and does not supply those critical supplies, then we will run out of it. So that will create a dangerous situation. So we found that we were dependent on Chinese manufacturing for critical supplies, and so there is a need for indigenization of defense procurement. We have to manufacture defense products within India. So indigenization, that is creating our own defense products, is very important, and impetus to indigenous industries is very important. And the relief operations, that is very important. And protecting infrastructure is very important. Demand for high-tech military products for the armed forces that spur the growth of entire supply chain is also very important. So we should not only focus on defense, but indigenization of defense products also is what the author is talking about. So this indigenization of defense products will help strengthen the defense of India, as well as it will create employment, and it will spur the growth. And also you should know, when we have a strong defense, we have a peaceful India, and the peaceful will in turn promote economic growth. So with that note, I have certain facts for mains in this particular editorial. Please have a note of it. If you have any doubts, please post it in the comment box, and also feel free to talk with me in the Telegram. Thank you, friends.